Good evening, and thank you, and welcome to our program this evening. My name is Sophie Lowe, and I'm the Visitor Service and Program Management Director at the museum at Eldridge Street. We are so excited to present to you this talk back today about the short documentary Egg Cream by Peter Miller, Nora Claire Miller, and Amy Milton. First, I want to thank our amazing Eldridge Street community member, Bert Schachter, who actually brought this film to my attention back in February. And then, of course, I want to thank the wonderful father-daughter duo, Peter and Nora, who so graciously agreed to take part in this talk. And finally, I want to thank our wonderful audience members for supporting us by joining us this evening. You will have noticed that your microphones are muted right now. You will be able to unmute yourself later on. And in fact, I encourage you to do some story sharing and asking questions. And as a reminder, the film is available to watch on your own time. You will have received a link in your confirmation email, and the film is available through tomorrow evening. So the way this evening is going to work is we're going to start off with some questions with both Peter and Nora, and then we're going to open it up to all of our guests later today. You can ask questions through the chat box or by raising your hand. And hopefully if there's time at the very end, we'll have a special egg making demo that we'll show off to folks. The closed captioning function is turned on right now. It's powered by AI, so there might be inaccuracies throughout. So if you want to turn it off, you can click the CC closed captioning button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Now, I do hope that you did have a chance to watch the film beforehand. If not, no worries. We're going to actually play a short trailer for you just to kind of catch us up to speed. But before then, I actually wanted to do a poll, and I wanted to ask everyone if they could share with me what is the proper way to make an egg cream. Do you add seltzer after adding the syrup or before? So I just want to take a couple of seconds for people to answer this poll oh, it's coming in fast. We'll spend another maybe 20 seconds. I think this is quite a controversial topic, but doesn't seem like it's that controversial because right now, after spoiler, most people think it's adding the seltzer after adding the syrup. All right, we're just gonna do 2 more seconds. And okay, so let's take a look at the results here. This is really interesting. Maybe we can talk a little bit about this. It says 13% say before, 85% say after, and we have someone who says, still confused, what's an egg cream? So maybe we'll be able to talk about that with Peter and Nora afterwards. So now I want to play the trailer for everyone to get us started.
The origins of the egg cream are shrouded in mystery. No one really knows why there's no egg and there's no cream in an egg cream.
So how do you make an egg cream anyway?
You want? I'll show you how.
Egg creams have a certain sadness to them. What people found in the egg cream in the tenement districts of New York City was a kind of short, blissful moment of relief from the heat, and it was also a kind of relief from hunger for richness.
I think of Rebbe's grocery store, and he had a run-down, decrepit fountain. I think he used the same glass for everybody.
A guy who had a place across the street from my apartment building, his name was Yankel, and he made a terrific egg cream. He'd have one sleeve always rolled up, and he never spoke. And that's my memory of egg creams.
You take that little moment of drinking the egg cream, which you sort of treasure for the rest of the day, because that's the only moment where you really have something good in your life.
Of course, we're having egg cream.
Best egg creams I've ever had in my life. They're so good.
She raised it up and she said, "White fire on black fire,
At that moment, they drank the very first egg cream in the history of the world.
All right, I hope everyone enjoyed that. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to briefly introduce Nora and Peter. Nora Claire Miller, she is a poet from New York City, currently living in Iowa City. Her poems have appeared or are forthcoming in Tagvverk, the Brooklyn Review, Apartment, Pulpmouth, and elsewhere. Her chapbook, LULL, won the 2019 Ghost Proposal Chapbook Contest, and Nora earned her MFA from Iowa Writers Workshop, and Egg Cream is her first film. Peter Miller is an Emmy and Peabody Award-winning filmmaker whose documentaries have screened in cinemas and on television throughout the world. His films include AKA Doc Pomus, Jews and Baseball, An American Love Story, Sacco and Vizetti, and International with Carlos Sandoval. He made A Class Apart for PBS's American Experience, now being adapted as a feature film, executive produced by Eva Longoria. Peter also co-directed Robert Shaw, Man of Many Voices, about the celebrated conductor, winner of 3 Emmy Awards for PBS American Masters. He co-wrote and produced Ken Rosenberg's Bedlam, about the crisis and care for people with severe mental illness, which premiered at the 2019 Sundance Film Festival, aired on PBS Independent Lens, and is a finalist for a DuPont Columbia Journalism Award. He's also worked on many, many more projects we'll be able to talk about later on. But Peter and Nora, please unmute yourself. Welcome. It's so wonderful to have you here with us. And again, congratulations on this wonderfully charming, nostalgic, and also informative film. So I thought the audience would maybe enjoy learning a little bit about how this project began and also what it was like for the both of you to work on this deeply meaningful and personal intergenerational project.
Or you should jump in, I think.
Okay, I will. Thank you, Sophie, first of all, for having us in the museum at Eldridge Street. The Eldridge Street Synagogue has been such an important place to me for such a long time, and I just am so honored to get to talk about egg cream here, and thank you all for being here. This project started when I was about 11. My dad is a documentary filmmaker, and I asked him one day, let's make a film together. And he said, sure. And I said, well, what do we need? And he said, well, it needs to be about something. And I thought, how do you make something about something? Well, you need a question. And so I went out looking for questions, and it wasn't long before we were sitting at the kitchen table drinking egg creams. And I said, why is this called an egg cream? There's no egg, there's no cream. It's just seltzer, milk, and chocolate syrup. And my dad said, I have no idea. It's just one of those things. And I said, well, maybe this is our question. After that, we started driving around New York City looking for the authentic New York egg cream, and more importantly, the story behind it. And maybe my dad can jump in because my memory of being 11 is foggy. You can fill us in on the details.
Well, the idea of I've worked on a lot of films with a lot of wonderful people, some of whom are here tonight, including our third partner in making this film, Amy Linton. Amy, raise your hand, take a bow, who's edited nearly everything I've ever made and is my filmmaking partner and editor. The secret sauce behind all documentaries is a great editor. But so if your kid asks you to make a documentary with them, like, what am I supposed to say? Like, this is what I've been waiting my whole life to do. And to make a documentary about the egg cream, which my father introduced to me. Like, that was one of those things. I was a kid growing up in suburban Boston, and Dad would periodically say, let's have an egg cream. And I think that's like the most ancient and ethnic thing I can imagine doing. And it just connected me to some past that he experienced that I hadn't really experienced. And we'd make egg creams at the kitchen table. And we did that in our house. So Nora and her kid sister Anna and I would, and their mom, we'd all make egg creams together. So the idea of like, let's make a movie about egg creams was just the best possible thing that I could ever imagine doing in my life. And we went off hunting for answers. one of the things we had to figure out is who knows anything about egg creams. We found the one historian who had ever written anything about egg creams, and read his article, and then found him, and he was gracious enough to let us interview him. And then we went traveling around from place to place, friends of ours, family members who knew things about egg creams, places where they served them. And I took my camera and we went out intrepidly and we filmed a whole lot about egg creams. And then eventually, Nora was going to serve egg creams at her bat mitzvah. And that was going to be the end of the movie. And then we were going to make a little movie out of it. And we did serve egg creams at Nora's bat mitzvah. And then, Nora, what happened?
Well, after my bat mitzvah, the tragic thing happened to me that happens to most kids after their b'nai mitzvahs, which is that I became a teenager. And I suddenly rapidly lost interest in doing anything with my parents or with, that would require an effort of me. And I said, oh, no more movie. And so we put the film away. And I think my dad wisely said, in a few years, you'll feel differently. And it took until I was in college for us to uncover these old tapes that we had made, and for us to say, hey, wait, there's something here. And my dad wrote to me one day and he said, I was cleaning out my office and I came upon egg cream. We should watch these again. We should retell the story. But so much time had passed. The film had changed. How do you finish something with an 11-year-old narrator when that 11-year-old narrator is 22? And so I think that's really the part of the story where Amy came in and really helped us figure out how it was that we were going to tell this story all these years later. And maybe my dad can jump in to talk about that.
So the movie becomes a movie by a 20-something-year-old looking back at her 11 and 12-year-old self, trying to figure out something about Jewish history from the perspective of being older. And it becomes not a film, I think, about a chocolate soda drink, but a film about how we understand our Jewish past and how we connect to it, and how a 20-something-year-old Jewish American looks back at her examination of what it meant to be a Jew in New York City as a kid. And that becomes the film that we made, which is all of 15 minutes long. And we never thought it was going to be anything at all. And then it got picked up for distribution and started being streaming places and showing at film festivals and winning prizes. And it was, but the other thing that happened in the course of shooting the film was that one of the ways that Nora understood the story of the egg cream was that she had this magnificent Hebrew school teacher who was Jerry Rake, who's just this brilliant Jewish educator, who built this ridiculous apocryphal story about the origins of the egg cream with the Maccabees, which he told every year around Hanukkah. And that became part of the lore that we had, of this woman warrior named Milka who created the first egg cream thousands of years ago, which probably wasn't true, but we felt we needed to film. So we went to his living room and we filmed him with a whole bunch of kids. And we got this story that also becomes part of our film. And, put it all in a glass. You take your footage, you take your syrup, you take your milk, you take your seltzer, you stir it up. That's Amy, our editor's job. And we created, friend of ours created some animation of bubbling titles for the film, Brian O'Connell. And we made a little 15-minute movie, which tries to get at the story of the egg cream, the history of the egg cream, and more important, I think, like the meaning of what do we make of this drink of poverty, this drink of affliction, this drink that comes out of tough times in the Lower East Side.
I think what was so compelling about the film was that Nora's looking back, her grandfather's looking back, you're looking back, everyone is looking back to this history and to the memory and trying to figure out what this means for you now and in the future. And I think even just looking at the Lower East Side, and there are so many classic, iconic egg cream places that are closing. Some have just closed this past year. Why do you think it's particularly important now to be retelling the story, to be to be preserving this story?
Well, it's such an interesting thing because the egg cream now is this thing that makes us think about the past, but when you drink it, it's a thing designed to make you think about the future. One theory as to why an egg cream is called an egg cream is that it's modeled after the cream egg, which was a much more upscale drink that was invented around the same time that actually did contain things like cream and things like eggs, things that Jewish immigrants on the Lower East Side wouldn't have been able to afford to put in a drink at a soda fountain and buy for a few cents. And so an egg cream in some ways holds this promise, even in its name, this hope for the future, this thing that that the people drinking it were feeling, this sort of bittersweet desire for something better. And now an egg cream is this sort of time capsule, this thing that we taste that gives us this nostalgia for that future that some of us got and some didn't. And this future that we don't know exactly how to tell anymore. So it's an interesting thing to think now about places like Eisenberg's. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Eisenberg's, but just the most beloved, wonderful place that's recently announced that they're closing. To me, it's this loss of a past that was all about a future. The Jewish deli, which was this place that was sort of part of my own cultural mythology growing up, a place, the type of place that my grandparents went, that I only understood as part of its history. And something about Eisenberg's closing to me feels like this sort of, I don't know, my dad put it really well today, and can you jump in here? What Eisenberg's closing felt like?
To me, it's like a loss of a family. It's a loss of the so much in New York is always changing, but New York is all about history and it's all about the past, and it's all about walking on streets and going into places where so much has happened. And Eisenberg's, I just remember going into Eisenberg's and getting a bowl of matzo ball soup, and the waitress who worked there for probably 100 years, by the end of her career, could not hold the bowl so steadily, and it was always a peril that it might end up in your lap. But they made the best egg cream. I love, as this counter on Fifth Avenue around 20th Street, Eisenberg Sandwich Shop, which they served an egg cream, but the Eisenberg's had been a Jewish place, but the egg cream, the guy who served the egg cream in our movie and the guy who served the egg cream when you were there is a guy named Jose who grew up in Mexico. And the other place that tragically has gone out of business recently is the Gem Spa, which was in the East Village, you know, iconic place to get an egg cream, where they have a big picture of an egg cream on the awning, and you go there to get your egg cream. It's like a newspaper stand. And they were always, for the last many years, about to go out of business. And finally, the pandemic dealt the final blow to this beautiful place. But Gem Spa, which was originally owned by the Goldfader family, it was a Lower East Side institution. It's been decades since there were Jews running it. It was run for the past many decades, I believe, by a family with origins in Bangladesh. And they made a great egg cream. So the two best egg creams that I know of were made by a Bangladeshi business and a Mexican-American counter person at Eisenberg's. And that, to me, is why I love New York.
Well, I think it also, I mean, you touch upon this in a way as well, the question of authenticity. You know, what makes an egg cream authentic? What makes it a real egg cream? And clearly, I mean, it doesn't really matter who's making it or what their background is. What to you does authenticity mean when it comes to egg creams?
Ah, what a great question. What does it mean to you, Sophie?
Way to flip that one back on me. Well, it's a question that I've been searching for a long time. I remember back when I was in college, I was thinking about authenticity in the neighborhood of the Lower East Side, looking at old establishment like Katz's, like Namwa Tea Parlor. These are old classic establishments known to be representing of the Lower East Side, but I think a lot of people would argue, you know, that's not really Chinese food. Maybe that's not really what Jewish food is either. but there are memories that are associated with these foods, and thinking about how this carries in the future. I mean, authenticity, I think that's kind of a problematic, oftentimes can be a problematic idea. What is authentic? I don't really know. It's definitely a question that I'm always pondering about. I already have some people who are also asking to ask some questions. So if you have something you want to share, feel free to type them in the chat box, or we can get to you towards the end of the program as well. So Nora,
I'm glad you brought up Namwa, because my dad, who introduced me to the egg cream, also, when he was a college student in upstate New York, would come into the city with his Chinese American roommate. And the place he went and got the first Chinese food he ever had as a Jewish kid, which meant also some of the first treif he ever had, was at Namwa, which was around back then. And it sort of sat there on Doyer Street, I guess it was, forever, and eventually got reinvented a few years ago, polished up, and they serve dim sum that is sort of updated and hip. And is that less authentic than what it was when it was sort of in its, many years in between? I think authenticity is whatever reality happens to be. And nostalgia is a complicated thing. Like, do we look back at an egg cream as this wonderful thing? An egg cream, we learned, is not necessarily the most delicious thing in the world. A lot of the people, I think when Nora was going off and asking open-ended questions as an 11 and 12-year-old, she'd be like, I love an egg cream. What do you think of an egg cream? And then her grandfather says, tell the truth. It wasn't so good. It was, and we talked with Andy Coe, the food historian who wrote the only academic article ever about the egg cream. And he's like, I'd rather have a lime Ricky. It's thin. It's made of seltzer. There's no cream or egg in it. It's made out of, seltzer, milk, and a little bit of chocolate syrup. It was a drink of poverty. It was a drink of necessity. But people look back at it as this kind of wonderful thing. But then we go off and visit Tom's restaurant in Prospect Heights in Brooklyn, where they serve an egg cream with a ton of whipped cream and a whole bunch of chocolate syrup sprinkled on top. And is that inauthentic because it's not punishment food? It's wonderful.
It's funny. I remember watching the scene from Tom's, and actually my first egg cream was at Tom's, and I thought it was a milkshake, and boy, was I mistaken. But Nora had a really great reaction from it too. I think Nora, you and your sister said it's just the most delicious one you've ever had because it was filled up with whipped cream.
Right. I mean, and my sister who came along on the shoot that day, she loves whipped cream. She loves things that are sweet. And so when I interviewed her, she said, this is the best egg cream because it's the sweetest one, and it had whipped cream, and that was a great addition. And when I think about, like, there's this sort of tension between authenticity and pleasure. Often we sort of deprive ourselves of the parts of things that are the best sometimes because we think this isn't the authentic experience. And it's so interesting when you think about an egg cream as this thing that's, many people told me as I interviewed them, it was not a pleasurable drink. It was an okay drink. It was a fine drink. It wasn't meant to be elevated to the place that it has been. But I've been thinking a lot about sort of authenticity in egg creams, living as I do right now in Iowa City, Iowa, where I'm one of about 7 Jews total, and trying to find chocolate syrup for this program because we're going to do a demo later. I ordered some from the grocery store, and all they had, and I see someone holding up Fox's U-Bet, which is what I wish I had, but I've got Hershey's, and it's completely inauthentic. On the other hand, the egg creams that I make in Iowa are completely authentic because they're about me telling stories about my own culture, my own history, this drink that feels very much of my people, this drink that I brought to Iowa. And what's more authentic than that? Bringing something with you from a place that you're from, something new. I showed egg cream in Muscatine, Iowa at the Muscatine Independent Film Festival a couple of years back. And I was in a room full of people, all of whom thought that it was about ice cream. And none of whom knew what an egg cream was or had ever heard of one. And I did an egg cream demo at the end. And I taught this little kid how to make an egg cream using some Hershey's syrup like this and some seltzer that they call sparkling water here, you know, and some 1% milk. And it was the most inauthentic thing you could think of. And at the same time, it felt so deeply connected to all of these questions about these recipes passed down between generations and across space and time.
But can I talk to you about Fox's You Bet? I have mine here.
Its own
Fox's
complicated,
You Bet, which is the authentic necessary ingredient in the egg cream, right? But back in the day, people, all kinds of people made syrup, homemade syrup, mom and pop syrup makers. There were dozens, hundreds of places where they made syrup in the Lower East Side and in Brooklyn and the Bronx and wherever they served an egg cream. Fox's was one of those companies that, from what I read, muscled out the smaller players, were kind of mobbed up and you know, and did harm, if not violence, to their competitors in order to corner the market. So we all feel warm and fuzzy about Foxes, but the Fox people, you know, they played rough, and you know, they did what they needed to do in order to get the market share. Now we think it's the only way to make an egg cream, but it's, you know, the lesson of all of this is everything is more complicated than you think it is.
We actually already have some people commenting on what they think is an authentic egg cream. Someone said it's got to be Fox's You Bet and seltzer from a glass bottle with siphon. And someone said that to be authentic, the seltzer should come from a seltzer bottle, not a plastic bottle. And then someone else goes, mobs, that's authentic. So I think it really varies over here. And someone also had a great question. They said, well, they never thought or realized that egg cream was in fact considered a poor man's drink. Maybe could you elaborate on that just a little bit more for, you know, people who didn't watch the film yet?
So an egg cream, so it's a, as Andy Coe in our movie, The Food Historian, says, it's a sweltering day in the Lower East Side. You're in your tenement building. You haven't got air conditioning. The only way that you can cool down is by getting a nice cold drink. Egg creams are served, you know, at a candy store or at a counter, oftentimes in a glass that is reused frequently, not necessarily all that cleanly. My dad remembers back growing up in Roxbury in the Jewish ghetto in Boston, that they would sort of rinse out the glass, but you know, hand it to you. It was a shared glass. It was an opportunity on a hot day to get a cold, refreshing thing, but it wasn't made with fancy ingredients. It wasn't made with eggs or cream. It was seltzer mostly, a little bit of milk, a little bit of chocolate syrup. It wasn't a luxury food, and it was served in very bare bones circumstances.
right, a rinsed out glass, you know, what was it that my grandpa says in the film, Schwenken.
Right.
Yeah.
And someone asked too, could egg creams have lost their place as a result of ice cream sodas? Any thoughts on ice cream sodas there? I see some people shaking their heads. No, absolutely not.
It's a different thing. An ice cream soda is a luxury. It's a wonderful luxury. An egg cream is what's available. I mean, we just got through Passover, right? So we're eating matzah. I think matzah is delicious, but really represents the suffering of trying to get the heck out of, you know, a dangerous place and rushing across the desert and not being able to let your bread rise. I mean, it's the bread of affliction. In some ways, an egg cream is the beverage of affliction. But I love it anyway, and I love a good plate of matzo brie.
I already see some people raising their hands, and maybe this is a good opportunity to start calling on people. Linda, you've had your hand raised for a little bit. Would you like to unmute yourself and say a few words? You'll have to go.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm actually in a doctor's office now, but I really wanted to hear this. So my daddy had a candy store on Livonia Avenue in Pennsylvania. People who went to Fortune's, I'm sure there's a few here, Brooklynites, who went to Fortune's. It still exists. It then went to Fifth Avenue in the gentrification of the world as we know it. So my dad made his own chocolate syrup in a giant pot over 4 burners with a big wooden spoon and a giant ladle. And he put them in cleaned out gallons of old chocolate syrup, and he bottled it himself and made his egg creams with that. No Bosco, no you bet, just Jack's, my daddy.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I
Thank
remember I was
you.
talking to you on the phone about this, and it just sounded like such an amazing memory too. And I'm sure you can't get that flavor anywhere else. It's not in a bottle. This is, a slice of the past.
Again, it's that memory that we all, through taste and smell and,
Yeah.
that we all have.
Thank you,
And
Linda.
the creation of in so many ways.
Yeah.
And in some ways, that's my favorite part of having made this film, is that I think it's that memory and memories like it that make the egg cream what it is. It's the fact that each of us come into it in these different ways, whether in a bucket of homemade syrup or the Hershey's I have here in Iowa. It's these sorts of stories contained in the drink and how we make it and how we think about making it. Thank you for sharing that, Linda.
So
Thanks
next,
for Bread and Puppet and the courage in the background.
Oh,
Also,
good.
tell me if that sofa had a plastic cover on it at one time.
This one?
Uh-huh.
Oh no.
That was
never. I bought this and strapped it to my car and dragged it hundreds of miles through
okay then.
seeing better days for sure.
So a next question is from Sherry Taxman. Sherry, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi. So having grown up in New York, a child of parents who both grew up in Brooklyn, I never realized egg creams were poor. I thought it was a treat. And as you can see, I continue to order Fox's You Bet online now that I've been kidnapped to live with my wonderful husband who grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. So come visit me from Iowa City. We're not that far away. And when we moved back here, after we were married, my mother-in-law of blessed memory bought me a beautiful cut crystal seltzer bottle with a whole case of like CO2 cartridges to make my seltzer, because she knew this is something I would miss. Even though she had no idea what an egg cream was, my husband only knew what it was when he came to SUNY Binghamton for graduate school. Second thing I want to add quickly is this picture. My friend Susan from Bell Harbor, this is her mother, Baby Fox. So her mother was Fox. And when I went to summer camp in upstate New York for like $4 million a minute as a kid, they only had Hershey's chocolate syrup. And my mother sent me jars, glass jars of Fox's You Bet syrup so I could have chocolate milk at camp for 8 weeks. And as you can see, I still order. And now there is like fair trade chocolate You Bet.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sherry. That's amazing. I saw Peter's face was like, oh, amazing.
This is one of the things about making a documentary is if I had known about Baby Fox when we were doing this, Nora and I would have found her and asked her. But you learn about these things. You finish your movie, you wrap it up, you put it out in the world, and then the stories start coming.
Well, Baby Fox would be like 110 years old, but Baby Fox's daughter, my friend Susan, is like 70, like I am, and you probably could have interviewed her.
We've made our egg cream film, but somebody else should make the sequel.
Henry Reeser. Henry, go ahead. What's your question?
No, a comment. Back in 1966, I was traveling home from Fort Jackson, South Carolina, where I had completed basic training, to Queens, my home in Queens. And due to some mess ups, I was making hops rather than than direct flights. And I decided, let me do a sociological study. How far do I have to go before I can get an egg cream? So we're talking about from, let's see now, I had a hop from South Carolina to North Carolina, then to DC, but it wasn't until I got back home to Far Rockaway and went to the local ice cream store that I was able to get an egg cream. So Peter, your comments about your dad in Boston, what are the geographical parameters of egg creams in this country in terms of availability and where you could get one?
I think if there was a Jewish neighborhood, you could get an egg cream. I mean, that's my sense, that it was, that they had them in wherever you happened to be, whether it was, I don't know the answer to that question. I know they had them in Boston. I know they had them all over New York. That's a great question. You figured out that in the 60s, you had to go back to Far Rockaway. They probably,
And if anyone has the answer to that, feel free to put it in the chat comments. Thank you, Henry. Renee, you have your hands raised. Please go ahead.
Hi. So nice to see Peter and Nora and Amy, who are my friends and sometime filmmakers. And my dad is the egg cream maker in the film. And Nora's in the film, and she's there with my daughters when the seltzer explodes. That was my dad. And for us, they always, my dad grew up, he was born here, but his parents were immigrants, and they had a candy store in 33rd and 3rd. And he was the egg cream and soda jerk. And he would make it for us. My brother's on too, my brother Leon, and he would make it for us. And it was like a big deal. Dad's making this egg cream. And it never really tasted so great, but it was always exciting. And I think Peter and I were talking about how it's kind of almost like a nostalgia for a nostalgia. It was like, I grew up in suburban Long Island. The Lower East Side egg cream was not my background, but it wasn't my personal experience. So it's a very complicated story, because it's sort of like, I shared the sense of nostalgia for my dad's nostalgia for a time in life that was quite difficult. I mean, he was doing it in the 1930s during the Depression. And, his parents, were working, 7 days a week, 14-hour days, the classic immigrant story. So anyway, it's, and of course now that our parents are gone, and Peter's wonderful dad is in it too. It also is nostalgic for us to hear their stories and see them. So it functions on many levels.
Thank you for sharing.
I can just say, Renee, thank you for lending us your dad to be in this movie. It was one of the way in which we did research was we talked with our friends, and I said, thinking about making a movie about egg creams, and you were like, you've got to talk to my dad. So there's a lot of dads who made egg creams, and the part of the beauty of the egg cream is it was made in so many places by so many wonderful people, and who had a candy store, an ice cream shop, or a deli. And God bless Arthur Silverman, who shared his technique with our kids and passed it along.
Thank you, Renee. Anyone else had comments? I see quite a few comments coming in. Yes, Joan, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Okay, good. So my chat is actually twofold. Number one, and just for clarity, was the egg cream known as, considered as, just for clarity, as the poor man's drink? Because I never heard of it referred to it like that. So just for clarity, was it known to be a poor man's drink? That's number one. And secondly, since we're going back in time a little bit, this question's for everybody. Who remembers one of, if not the best desserts back then? Can anybody remember what was the best dessert that we had back then that you very rarely find here?
Charlotte
So
Russe.
that's why my chat is twofold. Was it considered, was the egg cream actually considered the poor man's drink? And does anybody remember what
Charlotte
the
Russe.
most wonderful dessert? Who said it?
I never heard that
Charlotte
it was that.
Russe.
Yes, who said Charlotte Russe?
Charlotte Russe, yes. But I
Right,
never heard that it was poor man's. You think about the words used for matzah, having just,
Well, no, I only mentioned that because
well, I'm saying coming through matzah when you talk about like the oni, that it was like poor man's bread or every man's bread. I don't remember an egg cream. I don't remember my parents, who if they were alive today would be 108 years old. I don't remember them ever thinking about an egg cream being poor.
neither do I, but
I remember egg cream being special.
neither
And
do I just heard it now
having
in our
watched
chat
you back.
today.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So I just wanted to know if was it in fact or a known fact that it was considered the poor man's drink? Yes or no?
I don't think so.
Well, Peter, I mean, is that what you understood it to be, or that's just what we could look at it to be?
I think there's a lot of traditions of food that wasn't fancy that became very special to people. Like, a lot of soul food is based on the food that is available, that are from the lesser parts of the animal or whatever, but you turn them into something really special. And I think it was, this is a great question. I love that it's starting a conversation. I think it was the drink of people who didn't have a lot.
You do?
That's so interesting to me because I never thought about that.
Yeah, I never even thought about it as well until just hearing about it now. I think everybody, whether they were poor or well-to-do back then, had egg creams.
I saw somebody earlier who said they grew up in Far Rockaway. Where'd you go to high school?
And yes, Charlotte Russe was the dessert that I was.
Oh my God, I still remember that.
Does everybody remember the Charlotte Russe?
Absolutely.
So someone also said, I mean, for example, the gefilte fish is also a poor people food, but no one calls it that. It's extended, changed over time. I don't know. This is someone's comment here.
Oh, really? I never heard that either.
I never heard that either. I think the whole idea of gefilte fish was to make something that it prevented us from picking out bones. So we made it. So we, my mother, my grandmothers, whatever, made it. So there were no bones in it. So you didn't one of the 39 prohibited things, you weren't picking out bad from good. So
well, Peter,
I never thought about gefilte fish being poor fish.
Well, Peter makes a really good point. There's
actually,
a lot of
Rabbi Eddie Feinstein does the whole thing. If you think about it, gefilte fish is the way to take a small amount of fish, put added things into it, kind of like the seltzer adds,
to stretch it.
You're able to feed many people with the smaller amount of fish by extending it by adding filler. So it is poor people's fish.
That's an interesting thing, but I always thought about it as it wasn't, you didn't have to pick bones out of it in terms of serving a fillet of fish that you would have had to pick out bad.
How elegant nowadays, right? A fillet of fish where you serve a whole fish is the more elegant.
Yeah.
Well, I think again, this brings up a good point that foods change over time. There's different trends. They mean different things to different people, and they have different nostalgia factors too. And I think that's what makes this film so compelling. And so many people have debates and opinions about the foods too, because there's a lot of personal stories associated with it as well. Like Renee, your father making the egg cream, and then in that same film we saw Nora, your grandfather talking about an egg cream as well.
But yeah,